She was humiliated by a millionaire and his wife in front of her entire family without mercy. What no one expected was that she held something capable of changing everything in seconds. When the will came to light, silence took over the room, and no one could find the words to react. If this beautiful story of resilience and love interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing. Sarah Miller never imagined that one day she would be sitting in that imposing room, with its walls panelled in noble wood and old paintings that seemed to observe her with the same coldness as the people around her. The office of the attorney, Mr. Henry Sterling, was located in the historic heart of Savannah, Georgia, in a colonial mansion that exuded tradition and power. She felt completely out of place there, with her simple clothes and her timid way of occupying the space, as if she feared that at any moment someone would realize she didn't belong. The summons had arrived unexpectedly. A formal letter on embossed stationery with sophisticated language, informing her that her presence was mandatory for the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur Montgomery, a gentleman Sarah had barely known. She remembered him vaguely, a reserved man who lived on a remote property on the outskirts of the city. They had exchanged few words over the years, casual encounters at the market or in the town square, brief conversations that never went beyond polite greetings. Sarah never would have imagined that man would leave anything to her. Upon entering the room, she immediately noticed the difference in treatment. While the other guests were greeted with firm handshakes and cordial smiles, she received only a quick glance from the secretary, who pointed to a chair in the corner, far from the large conference table. There sat people she had never met in person, but whose names she knew by reputation. Distant relatives of Mr. Montgomery, people who rarely appeared in Savannah, but who now occupied the best seats with the posture of those who already knew exactly what they expected from that reading. Among them all, Alistair Thornton stood out. Tall, with perfectly groomed grey hair and a suit that certainly cost more than Sarah earned in 6 months, he commanded the room without needing to raise his voice. His presence was magnetic, imposing, and everyone around seemed to orbit him, waiting for his reactions before forming their own. Beside him, Victoria Thornton observed everything with a discreet smile, yet one heavy with superiority. Her jewelry sparkled under the soft light of the chandelier, and every move she made seemed calculated to demonstrate elegance and control. Sarah felt Victoria's gaze upon her, a look that traveled from her head to her toes, evaluating every detail. It wasn't necessary to hear words to understand the silent judgment. The young woman lowered her eyes, feeling her cheeks burn, and tried to concentrate on her own hands, which were trembling slightly in her lap. Mr. Sterling entered with firm steps, greeted those present with professional formality, and took his place behind his desk. He opened a leather folder, removed some documents, and adjusted his glasses before beginning. His voice was clear and measured, accustomed to conducting solemn moments like this. He began by reading the general provisions, explaining that Arthur Montgomery had passed away without leaving direct heirs, and that he had chosen to distribute his assets according to his own will, without necessarily following blood ties. Sarah noticed the murmurs around her, whispered comments among the relatives, and exchanged glances that conveyed expectation and poorly disguised greed. The lawyer continued reading, mentioning small objects, antique furniture, and some savings that would be divided among distant cousins and acquaintances. Each name pronounced was followed by distinct reactions, some nodding in satisfaction, others furrowing their brows in disappointment. Alistair remained impassive, arms crossed, as if all of this were merely a protocol to be endured before reaching what truly mattered. Then Mr. Sterling paused, turned a page, and cleared his throat before continuing. Sarah noticed the subtle change in the atmosphere, as if everyone had leaned forward slightly, attentive. And then her name was spoken. Sarah Miller. The lawyer's voice echoed in the room, and for an instant everything seemed to freeze. Heads turned in her direction, eyes widened, and expressions of confusion and disbelief spread across the faces around her. She herself felt her heart race, not understanding what was happening. Mr. Sterling continued, explaining that Sarah had been bequeathed the rural property located in the district of Black Creek, about 15 miles from downtown Savannah. An extensive plot of land with an old house, a well, and, as specified in the will, an animal that was to remain on the premises. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with tension. Then, like a wave finally breaking, the laughter came. First contained, then more open, transforming into comments that no longer cared to be discreet. Victoria was the first to verbalize what everyone was thinking, her voice melodic but full of irony. That abandoned place? The house that's falling to pieces? My goodness, what a generous gift. She exchanged a knowing look with her husband, who gave a lopsided smile, shaking his head in a gesture that mixed pity and amusement. Alistair leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. He looked directly at Sarah, and she felt the weight of that gaze, evaluative and condescending. He didn't need to say anything at that moment. His expression conveyed it all. It was a joke, a waste, something so insignificant it barely deserved attention. One of the distant cousins, a plump man with a thick mustache, let out a loud laugh. That land isn't even worth the effort of driving out there. No one has looked after it for years. It must be overgrown with weeds and full of junk. And she still has to take care of a beast? How kind. Others joined the chorus. Comments about the deplorable state of the property, about how it would be impossible to do anything useful with it, and about how Sarah should be happy to have received at least something, even if it was a burden. The words came from all sides, enveloping her like a storm from which there was no escape. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not there, not in front of those people. She clenched her hands tightly, her nails digging into her palms, using physical pain to contain the emotional. She wanted to disappear, to vanish from that place, to go back to her simple routine where no one judged her, where no one laughed at her existence. The lawyer tried to regain control, calling for silence with a firm gesture, but the comments continued for a few more seconds before finally ceasing. He went on with the reading, mentioning bureaucratic details, documents that would need to be signed, and deadlines to be met. Sarah heard the words, but they no longer made sense. Everything seemed distant, as if she were floating outside her own body, watching that humiliating scene from afar. When the reading finally ended, people began to stand up, talking among themselves, already completely forgetting about Sarah. Alistair approached the lawyer, exchanging a few words in a low voice, probably about other matters, more important business. Victoria adjusted her designer handbag and cast one last look at Sarah before leaving, a look that clearly said this girl was nothing, had nothing, and would never be anything. Sarah waited for everyone to leave before standing up. Her legs were shaking, and she had to lean on the chair for a moment before she could walk. Mr. Sterling called her over, handing her an envelope with the property documents and the keys. His expression was professional and neutral, but there was something in his eyes that could be interpreted as understanding, perhaps even a flash of pity. "Keep this safe," he said, his voice softer now, "and if you need help with the paperwork, you can come to the office." She thanked him with a nod, took the envelope and left that room as fast as she could, hurrying down the stairs of the colonial mansion, almost tripping in her haste to escape. Only when she reached the street, feeling the cool afternoon air on her face, did she allow herself to breathe deeply. The streets of Savannah were busy, tourists strolling among the historic buildings, residents greeting each other with familiarity. Sarah walked aimlessly for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. She had inherited a property, something that was hers. But instead of feeling joy or anticipation, she felt only the weight of humiliation, the laughter still echoing in her mind, the cruel words engraved like open wounds. She sat on a bench in the main square, watching the old fountain in the center, children playing, life following its normal course while hers seemed to have been turned upside down. She opened the envelope with trembling hands, pulling out the documents. There was the deed to the property, some old blueprints and black and white photographs of what the place looked like decades ago. A large house surrounded by trees, an organized yard. Nothing that resembled the current state, according to the comments she had heard. And then at the bottom of the envelope, her fingers touched something different. A small piece of paper folded and yellowed by time. She opened it carefully and read the handwritten words in a firm but delicate script. A short, almost enigmatic sentence. "True value is never where everyone looks. It is where few dare to search." Sarah read and reread those words, feeling something strange move inside her. She didn't know if it was hope, curiosity, or simply the desperation of someone who needed to believe there was something more beyond that humiliation. She folded the paper again, tucked it away with the documents, and stood up from the bench. She looked around at the city she knew so well, at the distant hills that surrounded Savannah like silent guardians. Somewhere out there, 15 miles from that historic center, was a plot of land that was now hers, a place everyone considered useless, abandoned, worthless, a place that, according to that mysterious note, held something no one else could see. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know if she should believe those words or simply forget everything and move on, but something inside her, a small but persistent voice, whispered that maybe it was worth finding out. Maybe it was worth going there, seeing it with her own eyes, trying to understand why Mr. Montgomery had chosen her, of all people, to receive that apparently senseless inheritance. As she walked back home, Sarah felt the weight of the envelope in her hands, and with it the weight of a decision she didn't yet know if she was ready to make. The laughter still echoed in her memory, but now there was also that sentence, those words that promised something different, something hidden. The sun began to set behind the hills, tinging the sky with shades of orange and pink, and Sarah moved forward, carrying with her not just the documents for a rural property, but also the seed of a restlessness that would not leave her in peace so easily. The days following the reading of the will were strange for Sarah. She tried to return to her routine, waking up early to work at the small craft shop where she was a clerk, preparing her simple meals, watching television before bed. But there was something different now, a constant restlessness that wouldn't let her be. The envelope with the documents sat on her dresser, and every time she passed it, she felt a tightening in her chest, a mixture of curiosity and fear she couldn't name. That sentence from the note haunted her. True value is never where everyone looks. It is where few dare to search. Sarah found herself repeating the words mentally while organizing merchandise on the shelves, while walking through the narrow streets of Savannah, while trying to sleep at night. What did Mr. Montgomery mean by that? Why had he chosen her, a girl he barely knew, to receive that property? Almost a week passed before she finally made the decision. It was a Saturday morning, the sky was clear, and the sun was already starting to warm up when Sarah caught a bus heading toward the Black Creek district. The trip took about 40 minutes, passing through dirt roads that cut through rural landscapes, small farms where cattle grazed peacefully, and simple houses with porches where elderly folks sat in rocking chairs. She got off at the stop closest to the address on the documents and followed a narrow road on foot, flanked by barbed wire fences and dense vegetation. The silence was profound, broken only by the singing of birds and the sound of her own footsteps on the packed earth. The further she moved from the main road, the more isolated the place seemed, and Sarah began to understand why everyone had laughed so much. This truly was very remote, far away from everything. When she finally caught sight of the property, her heart sank. The cruel descriptions she had heard were not exaggerated. The wooden gate was crooked, hanging by only one of its rusted hinges. The fence that marked the land had collapsed in several places, overtaken by vines and tall grass. And the house, which in the old photographs looked solid and welcoming, was now just a shadow of what it had been. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, the windows were missing glass, and the peeling walls revealed the old plaster underneath. Sarah pushed the gate open with effort, fighting the resistance of the weeds that had grown around it, and entered the property slowly. Her feet sank slightly into the soft earth, and she noticed that, even abandoned, the soil seemed different, richer than she expected. She walked toward the house, avoiding the loose boards on the porch that creaked dangerously under her weight. The front door was ajar, and as she entered, she was greeted by the smell of mildew and old wood. Sunlight filtered through holes in the roof, creating beams of light that cut through the gloom. There was old furniture covered in a thick layer of dust, cobwebs in the corners, and pieces of plaster fallen on the floor. Everything seemed frozen in time, abandoned in a hurry, as if the former residents had simply walked out one day and never returned. Sarah walked through the room slowly, observing every detail. A kitchen with a wood-burning stove still intact, small bedrooms with marks on the walls where paintings once hung, a large living room with a window overlooking the back of the property. She went to that window and looked out. Beyond the house, the land stretched over a considerable area, covered in brush and some fruit trees that seemed to have survived the neglect. And there, further back, she saw the well mentioned in the will, a circular structure of stacked stones with a partially collapsed wooden cover. And next to the well, tied to a post by a long rope, was the animal. A goat. But it wasn't an ordinary goat. Even from a distance, Sarah realized there was something different about it. Its coat was shiny and well cared for, and the animal moved with an elegance that didn't match the abandoned surroundings. How had it survived there alone for so long? Sarah left the house and walked toward the well. The goat watched her approach, calmly chewing a mouthful of grass. When Sarah carefully extended her hand, the animal didn't retreat. It simply sniffed her and then went back to grazing. There was a small improvised structure nearby, a kind of shelter made of boards and tin sheets, and next to it, a bucket of clean water. Someone was taking care of that animal. But who? As if answering that question, a voice called out from a distance. Sarah turned and saw an elderly woman walking toward her from a small house across the road, partially hidden by trees. The woman wore a simple dress and a straw hat to protect herself from the sun, and she carried a bag in her hands. "Good morning, dear," the lady said as she approached with a gentle smile. "You must be Sarah, right? Mr. Sterling told me you'd be coming." Sarah nodded, still surprised. The lady continued, placing the bag on the ground and taking out some fresh vegetables and a bag of feed. "My name is Mrs. Clara Higgins. I've lived near here for over 30 years. I'm the one who looked after Mr. Montgomery in his final days, and he asked me to keep looking after Star here, the goat, until you showed up." Star. The name seemed to fit the animal perfectly, which was now observing the two women with calm, intelligent eyes. Sarah felt immediate gratitude for this stranger who had kept alive the only thing left of her inheritance besides the land itself. Mrs. Higgins watched her for a moment, as if evaluating something, and then said in a soft voice, "Mr. Montgomery was a different kind of man, you know. He lived quietly here, didn't bother anyone, but he had a wisdom few people possess. He told me, before he passed, that it would take you a while to come, but that when you did, you would understand. He said you had eyes to see what others don't." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't understand how that man she had barely known could be so sure about her. Mrs. Higgins continued, picking up the bag again. "He left something for you, besides what was in the will. He asked me to keep it and hand it over when you came. Wait here a moment. Wait." The lady went back toward her house, and Sarah stood there next to the goat, trying to process it all. Minutes later, Mrs. Higgins returned, carrying a small wooden box, worn by time. She handed it to Sarah carefully, as if it were something precious. "He said you would know what to do with this, and if you need anything, any help at all, just call me. I'm always nearby." Sarah thanked the woman sincerely, holding the box firmly. Mrs. Higgins said her goodbyes and returned to her house, leaving Sarah alone again. She looked at the box, her heart beating faster, and walked back to the house. She sat on the porch steps, wiped the dust off the lid, and opened it slowly. Inside were several documents carefully organized in separate envelopes. Sarah began to examine each one. The first envelope contained detailed blueprints of the property, showing the exact division of the land, the location of water springs, and areas with the most sunlight. The second had old photographs, not just of the house, but of crops that had existed there decades ago. Abundant vegetable gardens, orchards laden with fruit, organized beds of legumes and greens. But it was the third envelope that changed everything. Sarah pulled out a technical document with an official stamp and signatures from specialized professionals. It was a soil analysis report, dated a few years back. She read with increasing attention, her heart racing with every line. The soil of that property was classified as extremely fertile, with a rare mineral composition ideal for specialized crops that required specific conditions. The presence of a constant water source, fed by a deep and stable aquifer, guaranteed irrigation all year round, even during dry spells. Sarah didn't fully understand all the technical terms, but she understood the essential part. That land, which everyone considered useless, had extraordinary value for agriculture. It wasn't just common dirt. It was special earth, capable of producing things that other properties in the region could not. And there was more. At the bottom of the box, she found another document, this one related to the goat. Star was not just any animal. She was from a specific, registered lineage, valued for her high production of superior quality milk and resistance to adverse conditions. A registration certificate accompanied the document, proving the purity of the breed and the animal's genetic potential. Sarah sat there for a long time, rereading the documents, trying to absorb what it all meant. Her mind worked fast, connecting information, remembering things she had read or heard about sustainable agriculture, organic products, and people's growing interest in quality food. What had seemed like a burden was in fact an opportunity, a real, concrete opportunity, proven by official documents. But then reality hit hard. She had no money, she had no specialized knowledge, she had no equipment, no experience with farming. The land was overgrown, the house needed urgent repairs, and she could barely pay her own bills at the end of the month. How could she turn that potential into something real? The cruel words from the will reading came back to her mind. The laughter, the derogatory comments, the look of superiority from Alistair and Victoria. Did they know? Did they already know the true value of those lands? Doubt planted itself in her heart, along with a spark of anger. If they knew, then the humiliation had been even more cruel, more calculated. Sarah stood up, put the documents back in the box and walked through the land again, this time with different eyes. She now saw not just the neglect, but the potential. She saw not just the ruined house, but the structure that could be restored. She saw not just the overgrown weeds, but the fertile soil underneath waiting only for hands willing to work. The sun was already high when she decided to head back. She locked the house as best she could, said goodbye to Star with a quick pat, and walked back to the road. Throughout the entire journey back to Savannah, her mind didn't stop working. She thought of the possibilities, the obstacles, the fears, and the hopes that mixed inside her like a storm about to break. When she finally got home, it was late afternoon. She sat at her small kitchen table, opened the box again, and spread all the documents out in front of her. She took a notebook and began making notes, rough calculations, and lists of what would be necessary. It wasn't just a vague dream, it was a plan, a difficult, risky plan that would require everything from her. But it was possible. For the first time since the reading of the will, Sarah felt something other than humiliation. She felt determination. She felt a flame ignite inside her, small still, but growing with every thought, every note in the notebook. Mr. Montgomery had believed in her for a reason. He had seen something others didn't, and maybe, just maybe, he was right. That night, Sarah slept with the box next to her bed, and for the first time in days her dreams were not haunted by cruel laughter, but by images of a different future, a future she herself could build with her own hands. The decision didn't come overnight. Sarah spent weeks thinking, calculating, turning possibilities over in her mind while she worked at the craft shop. She became distracted, forgot to record sales, and mixed up prices. Her boss had already reprimanded her twice, but Sarah could hardly care. There was something bigger occupying every corner of her thoughts, an idea growing with such force that it seemed impossible to ignore. She visited the land 3 more times during those weeks, always on weekends. During each visit, she talked with Mrs. Higgins, who shared stories about Mr. Montgomery, how he cultivated the land with dedication and knowledge, and how he produced vegetables and fruits that were highly sought after at local farmers' markets. The elderly woman spoke with affection of those times, and Sarah listened to every word like someone absorbing precious lessons. But it was on one of those visits that everything changed for good. It was a Sunday morning, and Sarah had arrived earlier, bringing some basic tools she had bought at a hardware store. She wanted to start clearing at least a small patch of land to see with her own eyes if she could make it work. She dressed in old clothes, tied back her hair, and began pulling up the weeds growing wildly near the house. She was so concentrated on the work that she didn't notice someone approaching. Only when a male voice sounded behind her did Sarah jump, turning quickly, her heart racing. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." The man was a few yards away, hands raised in a calming gesture. He was tall, with the tanned skin of someone who spent all day in the sun, slightly long dark hair, and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything around him with silent attention. He wore faded jeans, a long-sleeved shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and worn work boots. Sarah let out the breath she was holding, still trying to calm down from the shock. He continued, his voice calm and steady. "My name is Luke Anderson. I work on the properties around here, help with the land, repairs, that sort of thing. Mrs. Higgins told me you inherited this place." She nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Yes, I'm Sarah. I inherited it a few weeks ago. I'm trying to see what I can do here." Luke looked around, observing the state of the land, the ruined house and the weeds covering almost everything. His expression was neutral, hard to decipher. After a moment of silence, he spoke again. "Mr. Montgomery was a good man, knew how to work this land better than anyone. It's a shame to see it like this." Sarah felt a tightening in her chest. She wanted to say she had plans, that she knew the potential of the place, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. Luke continued, now looking directly at her. "If you need help, I can give you a hand. I know this area well. I know what works and what doesn't here." The offer caught Sarah by surprise. She didn't have money to hire anyone, and that must have been written all over her face because Luke added quickly, "I'm not talking about charging anything right now. I'm talking about actually helping. Later, if things work out, we can square up, but I won't let this place die for good. Mr. Montgomery deserves more respect than that." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation. They were of gratitude, of relief, of hope. She nodded slowly, unable to speak for a moment. Luke seemed to understand and simply picked up a hoe that was leaning against the house wall and began working alongside her, clearing weeds with firm, precise movements. They worked in silence for hours. There was no need for words, there was only the work, the sweat, the earth gradually being revealed beneath their hands. When the sun was too high and the heat became unbearable, they stopped to rest in the shade of a large mango tree growing at the back of the property. Mrs. Higgins appeared, bringing fresh water and some homemade bread, and the three of them sat together on the ground, eating and talking about the land, the possibilities, and what would need to be done. Luke spoke with deep knowledge about agriculture, planting cycles and soil management. Sarah listened intently, asking questions, mentally noting every piece of information. There was a strange connection forming between them, not romantic, not yet, but something solid based on mutual respect and a common goal. That night, back in her small home in Savannah, Sarah made the decision that would change everything. She gathered all the savings she had, calculated how much she could borrow, and made detailed spreadsheets of necessary expenses and investments. And on Monday morning she resigned from the craft shop. Her boss was surprised and tried to convince her to stay, but Sarah was determined. She thanked her for the years of work and left with a strange sensation of freedom and terror mixed together. She was burning her bridges. There was no more safety net. It was all or nothing. In the following days, Sarah moved to the property. Not completely, as the house was not yet habitable, but she took the essentials and set up a makeshift camp in one of the less damaged rooms. She woke with the sunrise, worked until her body ached, and slept exhausted on a thin mattress covered only by an old sheet. Luke showed up every day, early, always early, already bringing tools and an organized mental work plan. First, they repaired the roof, at least the main part, to protect the house from the rains that would soon begin. Then they worked on a complete clearing of the land, gradually revealing the real extent of the property. And with every square foot cleared, Sarah saw more clearly what Mr. Montgomery had seen. The earth truly was special, dark, crumbly, full of life. The relationship between Sarah and Luke was marked by a respectful distance, but one that was slowly dissolving. He didn't talk much about himself, but Sarah discovered bits and pieces. Luke was 32, had grown up in the region, and had worked in agriculture since he was a child. He had a practical way of solving problems, always finding creative solutions with the limited resources they had. And he believed in her. That was what touched Sarah the most. When discouragement threatened to take over, when she looked at the immensity of the work ahead and felt like giving up, Luke was there, quiet, working, showing through actions that it was possible. Not with empty motivational words, but with constant presence and shared effort. One afternoon, after nearly a month of intense work, they finally managed to get the well's irrigation system working. The water gushed out clear and abundant, filling the furrows they had dug, bringing life to the first beds they were preparing. Sarah stood there watching the water run and felt an emotion so strong she had to step away so as not to cry in front of Luke. But he noticed. He always noticed. He approached slowly, stood beside her in silence for a moment, and then said, his voice low but firm, "You're making this happen, Sarah. You're transforming this place. Mr. Montgomery chose right." She looked at him, at this man who had appeared in her life almost by chance, who worked by her side without asking for anything in return, who believed in the potential of that land as much as she did. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something beyond determination. She felt gratitude. She felt connection. She felt the beginning of something she didn't yet know how to name, but that warmed her chest in a different way. Days turned into weeks and the work continued. They planted the first seedlings, varieties Luke suggested based on the soil analysis Sarah had shown him, specialty greens, rare herbs, and some fruit trees that would take time to produce but would have high value. They created a rotation system, using every inch of land intelligently. Star the goat became an essential part of the routine. Sarah had learned to milk her, and the milk they produced was of exceptional quality. Luke suggested they try making artisanal cheese, taking advantage of the milk's purity and the growing demand for specialty products. They used the small kitchen of the house, already partially renovated, for the first attempts. They failed a lot and succeeded a little, but they persisted. At night, after Luke went home, Sarah would sit on the porch steps and look at the day's work. She saw the organized beds, the house becoming less of a ruin, the property taking shape, and she thought of Mr. Montgomery's words, of the certainty he had that she would be able to see the value of that place. But she also thought of Alistair and Victoria, the laughter during the will reading, the contempt with which they treated her. A part of her wanted to prove them wrong. She wanted to see them acknowledge their mistake, admitting that the inheritance was not a burden, but an extraordinary opportunity. But another part, the part growing every day working alongside Luke, began to realize that perhaps the best revenge was simply building something real, something of value, regardless of their recognition. On an especially beautiful morning, with the sun rising behind the hills and tinging the sky in golden tones, Sarah and Luke were checking the first vegetables that were starting to sprout when he stopped suddenly, looking at her with a serious expression. "You know, Sarah, there's something I need to tell you." He hesitated as if choosing his words carefully. "Alistair Thornton, I know who he is, and I know he's been interested in this land for years. He tried to buy it from Mr. Montgomery several times, but the old man always refused. He knows the value of this soil. He knows everything." Sarah felt her blood run cold. So it was true. The humiliation had been even more cruel than she imagined. Luke continued, his voice becoming firmer. "I'm only warning you because there will come a time when he'll show up here, and when he does, he'll come with a friendly face offering help. But he's not a friend. He wants this land, and he'll do whatever it takes to get it." The revelation weighed on Sarah like a stone, but at the same time it served as fuel for her determination. If Alistair wanted those lands, she would make a point of proving he would never have them. Not because she was vengeful, but because the place now meant something much bigger than a simple property. It was her chance to build something of her own, something true, something no one could take from her. "Thank you for warning me," she said to Luke, her voice firmer than she expected. "Let's keep going, let's make this work. It doesn't matter what he tries." Luke nodded, and for the first time since they met, he smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile, but it lit up his entire face. And in that moment, Sarah knew she wasn't alone. She would have at least one person by her side, believing in her, fighting together, regardless of what lay ahead. The work continued, more intense, more focused. And as the plants grew, as the property transformed, something also grew between Sarah and Luke. A deep trust, a mutual respect, a silent admiration that manifested in small gestures, quick glances, and carefully chosen words. It wasn't love yet, not in the traditional sense, but it was the solid foundation upon which something bigger could be built when the right time came. 3 months had passed since Sarah had made the decision to invest everything in that property. 3 months of work that left her body aching and her mind exhausted, but also brought a profound satisfaction she never imagined she'd feel. The transformation was visible. The organized beds produced lush vegetables, the first harvests had already happened, and the results exceeded expectations. The soil truly was exceptional. Sarah had taken some products to the weekly Savannah Farmers Market, a small, almost shy stall, but it soon began to attract attention. The vegetables had a different, more intense flavor, and the quality was unquestionable. The artisanal cheeses she made with Star's milk began to build a small, loyal clientele. It was nothing extraordinary yet, but they were the first concrete steps, proof that it wasn't just an impossible dream. Luke was by her side that Saturday morning, helping to organize products at the stall. They had developed a natural routine over those months, a partnership that worked without friction. He took care of the heavier work, soil management, and irrigation. She focused on cheese production, selecting the best seedlings and organizing sales. They talked more now, sharing simple meals at the end of the day, sometimes laughing at some funny situation that occurred. The initial distance had given way to a comfortable proximity, built brick by brick through trust and respect. It was on that day at the market that everything began to change again. Sarah was serving a customer when she noticed a different movement near her stall. People stepped back slightly, making way, and then she saw them. Alistair Thornton was walking toward her, dressed with a casual elegance that nonetheless screamed money and power. Beside him, Victoria observed everything with that same contained smile Sarah knew all too well. Sarah's heart raced. Luke, who was organizing boxes behind the stall, noticed the immediate tension and discreetly positioned himself beside her, his presence silent but comforting. Alistair approached with a wide smile, as if they were old acquaintances. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise to find you here. I heard you're working in agriculture now. Very brave of you." The words were kind, but the tone carried something Sarah couldn't quite define. Condescension, curiosity. She responded with a firm voice, firmer than she expected of herself. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton. Yes, I'm working the property I inherited." Alistair looked at the products displayed on the stall, picked up a head of lettuce and examined it with exaggerated attention, like an expert evaluating something rare. "Impressive quality. Truly impressive. And I'm told you're doing all this alone. It must be a lot of work." Sarah felt Luke move slightly beside her, a protective presence. "I'm not alone, I have help." Alistair looked at Luke then, a quick but evaluative glance. His eyes returned to Sarah and his smile grew a bit wider. "You know, Sarah, I came here specifically for this. I've been following your progress, and I must admit I'm impressed. You've managed to do something many considered impossible. That shows vision and determination." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "Because of that, I want to make an offer I believe would be beneficial for all of us. I am prepared to buy your property for a fair price, much higher than anyone would pay for a common plot of land. You could use that money to start something new, perhaps somewhere closer to the city with better infrastructure. It would be easier for you." Sarah felt something icy run down her spine. It was exactly what Luke had predicted. Alistair was there, acting like a friend, offering help, but only wanting to take what was hers. She took a deep breath before responding, keeping her voice calm. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Thornton, but I have no interest in selling. The property means a lot to me, and I have long-term plans for it." Alistair's smile flickered slightly, almost imperceptibly, but he quickly composed himself. Victoria intervened then, her voice melodic, but with a thread of impatience. "Sarah, dear, be reasonable. You're young. You have no experience in farming. What you're doing now is nice, but it's not sustainable. Eventually, you'll face problems you won't know how to solve. Why not accept a generous offer while you still can?" Sarah looked directly at Victoria, remembering the laughter during the will reading, the contempt, the humiliation, and for the first time, she didn't feel shame or fear. She felt only certainty. "With all due respect, Mrs. Thornton, I think I know exactly what I'm doing, and if problems arise, I'll find ways to solve them." The silence that followed was tense. Alistair looked at Sarah with a different expression now, as if he were re-evaluating her. There was no more condescension, only a calculated coldness. "I see. Well, the offer stands if you change your mind. But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." They walked away, and Sarah felt her legs shake slightly, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Luke touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of silent support. "You did well," he said quietly, only for her to hear. But that was only the beginning. In the following weeks, strange things started to happen. Sarah received a notice from the city council questioning the property's compliance, claiming that updated registry documents were missing. She spent days chasing paperwork, paying unexpected fees, and proving things that were already proven in the documents she had received with the inheritance. Then it was the local farmers' association. Someone spread rumors that she was using inadequate techniques, that her products might not be safe. Customers who were becoming regulars suddenly disappeared, replacing her vegetables with those from different suppliers. Sales at the market dropped drastically. Luke tried to find the source of the rumors, talking to other farmers, but everyone seemed evasive, changing the subject when he pressed. It was like fighting shadows, fighting something that had no defined shape but was there, hindering, blocking, sabotaging. Sarah had no proof, but she knew. She knew Alistair was behind it. It was too subtle, too organized to be a coincidence, and the worst part was that she could do nothing directly. She couldn't accuse him without evidence. She couldn't confront him without sounding paranoid or desperate. Financial pressure began to squeeze. The costs of bureaucratic regularizations had consumed a significant portion of her savings. With sales down, she could barely cover the basic maintenance costs of the property. She thought about taking out a loan, but without solid guarantees and with the rumors circulating, no bank showed interest in helping her. Luke offered what he had, his own modest savings, but Sarah refused. It was already too much that he was working practically for nothing in return. She couldn't take his money too. He insisted and argued, but she was adamant. This created the first real tension between them, the first crack in the partnership that had been working so well. Then just when Sarah thought things couldn't get worse, the hardest blow came. A pest attacked part of the production. It wasn't natural. Luke recognized it immediately. Someone had deliberately introduced specific insects into the main beds, a deliberate and carefully executed sabotage. They lost nearly half of what was ready for harvest. That night, sitting on the porch steps, Sarah looked at the land she had grown to love over the past months and felt despair hit with full force. Maybe everyone had been right from the beginning. Maybe she was just a naive girl trying to do the impossible. Maybe she should have accepted Alistair's offer when she had the chance. Luke sat beside her in silence. They stayed there for a long time, just watching the stars begin to appear in the dark sky. Finally he spoke, his voice low but firm. "He wants you to give up. He wants you to feel defeated with no way out. That's exactly why you can't give up now." Sarah turned to look at him, and for the first time she let him see the tears streaming down her face. "I'm tired, Luke. I don't know if I have the strength to keep fighting something I can't even see properly." He held her hand, a simple gesture but one loaded with meaning. "Then fight what you can see. Fix the damage from the pests. Win back your customers. Prove to everyone that the rumors are lies. One step at a time, and I'll be here. I won't let you face this alone." There was something different in his voice, something beyond professional partnership or casual friendship. There was commitment, loyalty, something deeper that Sarah wasn't sure how to name, but that she felt resonating inside her. She looked at this man, who had appeared in her life almost by chance, who worked beside her day after day, who believed in her when she doubted herself. And she realized that at some point, without her noticing exactly when, Luke had become essential. Not just for the success of the property, but for her ability to keep going, to resist, to not collapse completely. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "For everything, for being here, for believing." Luke didn't answer with words. He simply nodded and stayed there, sitting by her side, his presence solid and comforting as the night moved on and the stars shone above them, silent witnesses to a connection growing in the midst of the storm. In the following days, Sarah worked like never before. She recovered what she could from the damaged production, saved some seedlings, and replanted others. She researched natural pest control and implemented preventive measures. She went to the city council once more, gathered every document possible, and proved point by point that everything was in order. She personally visited every customer she had lost, showed them her production, offered free samples, and patiently answered all questions about her methods. It was exhausting. There were days when she could barely keep her eyes open, she was so tired. But Luke was right, one step at a time. And slowly, very slowly, she began to see small results. Some customers returned. New ones appeared, attracted precisely by her persistence and the quality that hadn't diminished despite all the obstacles. But Sarah knew that wouldn't be enough. Alistair wouldn't give up easily, and she would need something more, something bigger, to guarantee not just the survival of the property, but its true success. She needed a plan that would completely change the game. And as she worked, as she fought every obstacle, her mind didn't stop searching for that solution, for that chance that would make all the difference. Winter arrived in Savannah, bringing frosty mornings and mists that covered the hills like white cloaks. Sarah woke up shivering in the small room she had managed to renovate in the house, wrapping herself in old blankets while trying to gather the courage to face another day. It had been almost 6 months since she started this journey, and for the first time since the beginning, she felt she might not be able to continue. The financial situation was critical. Sales had improved slightly after all the effort to win back customers, but it still wasn't enough to cover all the costs. There were overdue bills, suppliers calling, and a debt at the farm supply store that grew every week. Sarah calculated and recalculated the numbers every night, trying to find a solution, but the numbers simply wouldn't add up. And then came the final blow. The contact Luke had made with a cooperative of organic restaurants, an opportunity that could have changed everything, fell through. Someone, Sarah was sure who, had spread false information about the quality of her production, claiming she used prohibited pesticides and that her products weren't truly organic. The cooperative cut ties before they even visited the property, without giving her a chance to defend herself. It was the last straw. That afternoon, Sarah sat on the kitchen floor and cried like she hadn't cried since she was a child. She cried with anger, with frustration, with exhaustion. She cried because she had invested everything, had risked everything, and it seemed that nothing would ever be enough. Alistair Thornton was too powerful, had too many contacts, too many resources. How could she fight against that? Luke found her like that, sitting on the floor, her face red from crying. He had left earlier that day to handle some personal business, but had returned bringing new seeds he had found on sale. When he saw Sarah in that state, he dropped everything and knelt beside her. What happened? His voice was heavy with genuine concern. Sarah tried to explain through sobs, the words coming out fast and confused. She talked about the cooperative, the debts, and how everything seemed to be crumbling no matter how hard she tried. And then, for the first time, she verbalized the thought she had been avoiding for weeks. Maybe I should accept his offer, Luke. Maybe this is a sign that I'm not strong enough for this. The silence that followed was heavy. Luke stayed there, kneeling beside her, saying nothing for a long moment. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he stood up abruptly, walked to the window, and stood with his back to her, looking out. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, almost irritated. "I'm not strong enough," he repeated her words with bitterness. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Sarah? I see a woman who took a piece of land everyone considered trash and turned it into something productive. I see someone who works from sunrise to sunset, who doesn't give up even when everything seems impossible. I see courage, determination, strength." He turned around and Sarah saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Anger, yes, but not directed at her. It was the anger of seeing someone he believed in, belittling herself, letting herself be beaten before the fight was over. "Do you think I'd be here if I didn't believe in you? Do you think I'd dedicate months of my time, put my own savings at risk, if I thought you didn't have what it takes? I could be working at any other property, earning a steady salary, without the headaches. But I'm here because I saw from day one that you're different." Sarah looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his words. Luke continued, his voice becoming softer but no less firm. "Alistair wants you to quit. Every obstacle he places, every lie he spreads, is calculated to break you. And if you quit now, he wins. Not just the land, but the satisfaction of having proved that you were too weak to hold on to it. Is that what you want to give him?" The words hit Sarah like a reality check. She wiped the tears from her face, took a deep breath and tried to organize her thoughts. Luke approached again, kneeling in front of her, and for the first time since they met, he took her face in both hands, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. "I'm not going to let you quit, do you understand? We're going to find a way to solve this, together. But you need to stop doubting yourself. You need to remember why you started this." Sarah felt something shift inside her. It was as if Luke's words had reignited the flame that was nearly extinguished. He was right. She had started this not just for the inheritance, but because she had seen potential where no one else did. Because she wanted to prove, mainly to herself, that she was capable of building something of value. And quitting now would be betraying not just Mr. Montgomery, but herself. "You're right," she said, her voice still shaky but gaining firmness. "I'm sorry, I was just so tired, so scared." "I know." Luke let go of her face but took her hands, interlacing his fingers with hers. "I get scared too sometimes. Scared that it won't be enough, that we'll fail. But fear only wins if we let it." They sat there on the kitchen floor, hands interlaced, and Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed between them. It was no longer just a work partnership. It was no longer just a friendship. There was something deeper, more intimate, a connection that went beyond any simple definition. Luke had become an essential part of her life, and she suddenly feared losing him as much as she feared losing the property. That night, they sat together and made a plan. Not a vague plan full of abstract hopes, but something concrete step by step. First, they needed to resolve the legal issues once and for all. Sarah would gather every document, every piece of evidence, every certificate she had, and go personally to all the necessary government offices. She would no longer accept evasive or bureaucratic answers. She would demand written certifications, official seals, everything needed to prove definitively that her property was in order. Second, they would attack the rumors head-on. Luke knew a respected agronomist in the region, someone impartial with no ties to Alistair. They would ask for a complete inspection of the property, a technical analysis of all processes and products. With an official report from a recognized professional, they could debunk the accusations incontestably. And third, Sarah had an idea. If the restaurant cooperative didn't want to work with her because of rumors, maybe there were others interested. She remembered reading about a chain of markets specializing in organic and sustainable products that was expanding into Georgia. If she could get a meeting, if she could present not just the products but all the documentation, the reports, and the concrete proof of what she produced, maybe she had a chance. In the following days, Sarah worked with renewed determination. She visited the city hall, the deed office, the land institute, one by one. She faced lines, filled out forms, and paid fees she could barely afford. But she didn't give up, and slowly, very slowly, she began to gather everything she needed. Updated certificates, confirmed registrations, everything in order, everything proven. Luke brought the agronomist, a middle-aged man named Paul Richards, who spent 2 full days examining the property. He analyzed the soil, tested the water, checked the plants, and examined the production processes. In the end, he issued a complete technical report stating that everything was within the strictest standards of organic farming, that the soil was indeed exceptional, and that the methods used were appropriate and sustainable. With the documents in hand, Sarah did something she never thought she'd be capable of. She took a bus to Atlanta, the capital, and went after the market chain. She managed to schedule a meeting, even without contacts, just through persistence and sincerity. She introduced herself, told her story without embellishment, showed her products, and, most importantly, showed the complete documentation. The special soil, the high-quality water, the agronomist's report. Everything. The chain's representatives were impressed, not just with the quality, but with the organization, the transparency, and the care she showed in every detail. They said they would be in touch, but Sarah saw in their eyes that it was more than an automated response. There was genuine interest. She returned to Savannah exhausted but with renewed hope. Luke was waiting for her at the bus station, and when she stepped off and saw his face, she couldn't contain her smile. She told him everything during the drive back to the property, and he listened to every word with attention, a small but genuine smile on his lips. "You did it," he said when they arrived. "You really did it." "Not yet." The answer hasn't come, but I gave it my best, and if it doesn't work, we'll find another way. Luke stopped the car at the property entrance and looked at her. It's going to work, I know it is. There was a certainty in his voice that was contagious. And in that moment, looking at this man who had been by her side every step of the way, who believed in her even when she doubted herself, Sarah felt something break inside her. It was no longer just gratitude or admiration. It was something deeper, scarier, truer. "Luke," she began, her voice hesitant, "I don't know what I would have done without you. You saved not just the property, but you saved me when I was about to give up on myself." He looked at her, and for the first time since they met, he let her see everything in his eyes. The concern, the care, the affection that had been growing silently during all those months. "Sarah, I didn't do anything you wouldn't have eventually done alone. I was just here to remind you of who you really are." They sat there in the parked car, eyes fixed on each other, and the world around them seemed to disappear. There were so many things Sarah wanted to say, but words seemed too small to express what she felt. So, she simply reached out and touched his face, a gentle, almost timid gesture. Luke covered her hand with his, and in that simple touch there was a silent promise that they would be together no matter what came, that the fight was no longer just for one, but for two, that they had built something solid not just in the earth, but between them. And when they finally got out of the car and walked together toward the house, there was a new lightness in the air, a feeling that despite all the obstacles and uncertainties, they had each other. And that, somehow mysteriously, made everything seem possible. The answer arrived 3 weeks later. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing a new batch of cheeses when she heard her cell phone ring. It was an Atlanta number. Her heart raced as she answered with trembling hands. The voice on the other end was professional but warm. "Miss Miller, this is Robert Sterling from Southern Harvest Markets. We would like to schedule a visit to your property to formalize a partnership. We were very impressed with your presentation and think your products fit perfectly with what we are looking for." Sarah had to lean against the kitchen counter, her legs suddenly weak. She managed to respond with a voice that tried to sound calm, scheduling the visit for the following week. When she hung up, she stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then, unable to contain herself, she ran outside screaming for Luke. He was at the back repairing the fence that marked the new beds. Hearing Sarah's screams, he dropped everything and ran toward her, his face tense with worry. "What is it? What happened?" "We did it." Sarah was laughing and crying at the same time. "Southern Harvest Markets, they want a partnership. They're coming here next week." For an instant, Luke stood still as if he couldn't process the words. Then, in a completely unexpected move, he picked Sarah up by the arms and spun her in the air, laughing with her. When he put her back on the ground, his eyes were shining in a way she had never seen. "I told you it would work, I told you." They stood there, hugged, sharing that moment of pure joy. It was more than a business opportunity. It was the confirmation that everything they had fought for, every drop of sweat, every moment of doubt overcome, had been worth it. The following week passed in an intense rush. They organized the property, prepared samples of the best products, and reviewed all the documentation once more. When the car from Southern Harvest Markets finally arrived, Sarah was nervous but confident. Robert Sterling came accompanied by a nutritionist and a specialist in organic agriculture. They spent hours examining everything, asking questions and tasting the products. In the late afternoon, they all sat together on the porch to discuss the details. Robert got straight to the point. "We want to establish an exclusive supply contract. Your products have exceptional quality, and the story behind them adds a value our customers will love. We're talking about a long-term partnership with a monthly purchase guarantee and the possibility of expansion as your production increases." The numbers they presented made Sarah's eyes widen. It was much more than she had imagined. Not just enough to pay off all the debts, but to invest in expansion, improve infrastructure, and maybe even hire additional help. It was the security she needed, the stability that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. They signed a preliminary contract right there, with the full formalization scheduled to happen in a month. Time for Sarah to organize the final paperwork and for the chain to prepare the distribution logistics. When the car drove away, leaving a cloud of dust on the road, Sarah and Luke stood at the property entrance, still processing what had just happened. Luke broke the silence first. "You did it, Sarah. You really managed to turn all this into something extraordinary." "We did it," she corrected, looking at him. "Without you, none of this would have been possible." But the joy was interrupted days later by unexpected news. Mrs. Higgins appeared bringing a letter that had arrived for Sarah. It was a summons from the attorney, Mr. Henry Sterling, the same one who had conducted the will reading months ago. The message was brief. It requested the presence of Sarah and all the relatives mentioned in the will for an important meeting related to Arthur Montgomery's estate. Sarah felt a chill down her spine. What else could there be? Why were they being summoned again? Luke, upon reading the letter, frowned. It could be some attempt by Alistair to contest the inheritance. He must have found out about your contract. The possibility left Sarah tense throughout the week leading up to the meeting. On the appointed day, she dressed in her best clothes, took all the property documentation, including the contract with Southern Harvest Markets, and went to the lawyer's office. Luke offered to go with her, but she gently refused. This was something she needed to face alone. The room was full when she arrived. She immediately recognized the faces from the first will reading, the distant cousins, some acquaintances of Mr. Montgomery, and of course Alistair and Victoria Thornton. They all watched her enter, and Sarah noticed the varied expressions: curiosity, surprise, and in Alistair's case, something that looked like poorly disguised irritation. She sat in the same corner chair she had occupied months ago, but this time she didn't feel small or out of place. She kept her head high, her hands firm on the bag where she carried her documents. Mr. Sterling entered punctually, greeted everyone, and took his position behind his desk. His expression was solemn, but there was something in his eyes, a glint Sarah couldn't decipher. "I thank you all for being here. This meeting was scheduled because there are additional provisions in the will of Arthur Montgomery that were only to be revealed 6 months after the initial reading, according to instructions he left." A murmur ran through the room. Alistair leaned forward, clearly interested. The lawyer continued, opening a sealed envelope that had been in his drawer. Arthur was very specific in his instructions. He foresaw that there would be questions about his choices, especially regarding the rural property left to Miss Sarah Miller. Therefore, he left this document clarifying his motivations. Sarah felt her heart race. Mr. Sterling began to read, his voice clear and measured. Arthur had written a long, detailed letter explaining why he had chosen Sarah specifically. He described how he had observed her over the years, noting her kindness, her humility, and her ability to see beauty where others saw only the ordinary. He mentioned that he had discreetly tested other people, including some present in the room, by offering small opportunities to see how they would react, and everyone without exception had demonstrated greed, interest only in material value, and contempt for honest work. The lawyer paused and looked directly at Alistair before continuing. "Arthur wrote specifically about you, Mr. Thornton. He describes how you tried to buy the property several times, always offering low values, trying to take advantage of his advanced age, how you spread rumors to devalue the land in the eyes of other potential buyers, how you tried to manipulate city records to create bureaucratic problems." Alistair turned red, but said nothing. Victoria beside him was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. The lawyer continued reading. Arthur explained that he had left the property to Sarah precisely because he knew she would be the only one capable of seeing its true value. Not the monetary value, but the value of labor, of the earth, and the possibility of building something genuine. And most importantly, he knew she would be tested, that she would face obstacles, that others would try to take from her what was hers by right, and he trusted she would have the strength necessary to resist. The room was in absolute silence. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were of gratitude, of a finally complete understanding of the gift she had received. It wasn't just land. It was an opportunity to prove to herself who she really was. Mr. Sterling folded the letter and looked at Sarah. Arthur also left instructions that, should you manage to keep the property for at least 6 months and demonstrate that you are making productive use of it, additional documents were to be released. "These documents," he said, handing a thick envelope to Sarah, "include complete geological surveys of the land, contacts for specialists in sustainable agriculture, and a sum of money he set aside specifically for investment in the property. He wanted to make sure you had not only the opportunity, but the resources necessary to succeed. Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was everything the lawyer had mentioned, including a check for an amount that made her catch her breath. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make a difference, to expand production and carry out all the plans she had. Alistair couldn't contain himself. "This is absurd. A will cannot have conditions like this. I will contest it. This woman has no right to any of this." Mr. Sterling cut him off with a firm voice. "The will is perfectly legal, Mr. Thornton. Arthur had every right to distribute his assets as he wished, including setting conditions. And Miss Miller fulfilled all of them. There is no basis for a contest." Sarah stood up then, holding the envelope against her chest. She looked directly at Alistair, and for the first time since she had met him, she was the one in control of the situation. "Excuse me, Mr. Thornton, but I would like to share something with everyone here." She opened her bag and pulled out a copy of the contract with Southern Harvest Markets. "The property that you and so many others here, considered useless now, has an exclusive supply contract with one of the largest organic product chains in Georgia. The very products that were ridiculed are now being recognized for their exceptional quality, and this was built with work, dedication, and the courage to see possibilities where everyone else saw only failure." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer one of contempt or superiority, but of surprise and, on some faces, something that looked like respect. Alistair was visibly shaken, but said nothing more. Victoria looked away, unable to maintain eye contact with Sarah. The meeting ended shortly after. People left in silence, some casting curious glances at Sarah, others avoiding looking at her completely. Alistair and Victoria were the first to leave, hurried, without looking back. Sarah stayed until the end, talking with Mr. Sterling. He shared a few more stories about Mr. Montgomery, how the old man had planned everything meticulously, how he was certain Sarah was the right person. Before she left, the lawyer said something she would carry with her forever. "Arthur told me once that a person's true character is revealed not in easy victory, but in difficult struggle. You proved he was right." When she left the office, the sun was setting, painting the savannah sky with golden and pink tones. Luke was waiting for her, leaning against the car, and when he saw her face, he knew immediately that something significant had happened. She told him everything on the way back, the words tumbling out heavy with emotion. Back at the property, they sat on the porch watching the stars begin to appear. Sarah held the envelope she had received, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Mr. Montgomery, how he had trusted her, and how he had planned everything so she would have the chance to prove her worth. Luke broke the silence. "What are you going to do now?" Sarah smiled. "We're going to expand. We're going to turn this into something even bigger, not for revenge or to prove something to others, but because it's what Mr. Montgomery would have wanted, because it's what this land deserves." He nodded and then added softly, "And what do we deserve?" Sarah looked at him, at this man who had been by her side every step of the way, who believed when all seemed lost, who had become an essential part of her life. "We deserve to build something together, not just here on the land, but in our lives." Luke took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Then that's what we're going to do." The following months were a complete transformation. With the investment left by Mr. Montgomery and the contract guaranteed with Southern Harvest Markets, the property flourished in ways Sarah had never imagined. They expanded production, hired 2 helpers, and installed greenhouses for specialized crops. Sarah's cheeses began winning awards at regional fairs, and orders from other states started coming in. But perhaps the most significant moment happened 6 months later, at the Great Savannah Farmers Expo, an annual event that brought together farmers from all over the region. Sarah had been invited to present her products at a special booth reserved for producers who stood out for sustainable practices and exceptional quality. The stall they set up was simple but elegant, showing not just the products, but also photographs of the property's transformation, the before and after, the entire journey. Luke was by her side, helping to organize and talking to visitors, his presence constant and comforting. And then, in the middle of the afternoon, Sarah saw Alistair and Victoria approaching. Her heart tightened for an instant, but she maintained her composure. They stopped in front of the booth, observing everything in silence. Victoria looked at the products, the photographs, and Sarah, and there was something different in her expression. It was no longer contempt. It was something closer to reluctant recognition. Alistair finally spoke, his voice lacking the arrogance of before. "I must admit I was wrong about you, Miss Miller. What you've managed to do is impressive." Sarah could have been cruel. She could have returned the humiliation she had received, but she looked at Luke, at the property they had built together, at everything they had achieved, and realized she didn't need that. Her victory wasn't in making others feel small, but in having proved to herself that she was capable. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. But it wasn't just me, it was work, dedication, and believing in possibilities that others didn't see." They walked away soon after, and Sarah never heard of any more attempts at sabotage or interference. The message was clear. She had won not through direct confrontation, but through undeniable results. At the end of the day, as the fair was closing and the sun began to set, Sarah and Luke walked together through the property. Everything was different now. The organized beds, the completely renovated house, new projects being planned. But more than that, they were different. They were no longer just work partners, they were life partners, united by a journey that had transformed them as much as it had transformed that land. Sarah stopped in front of the well, the same well she had seen for the first time surrounded by neglect and weeds. Now it was restored, working perfectly, providing water for the entire production. She thought of Mr. Montgomery, of how he had seen something in her that she hadn't seen in herself, and she felt a deep gratitude, not just for the material inheritance, but for the opportunity to discover who she truly was. Luke hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that sometimes the greatest gift isn't what we receive, but the chance to prove to ourselves what we are capable of." He turned her around to face him, looking deeply into her eyes. "And you are capable of much more than you ever imagined." Sarah smiled, and in that smile there was peace, pride, and hope. They had come a long way since that humiliating afternoon in the lawyer's office. They had faced obstacles, overcome doubts, and resisted sabotage, and they had won. Not because they were perfect or because everything was easy, but because they refused to give up, because they believed in the potential that others couldn't see. As the sun set behind the Savannah hills, tinging the sky with impossible colors, Sarah and Luke stood there embraced, watching the land they loved so much. And they knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that this was only the beginning. That there would be more challenges, more growth, and more transformations, but they would face it all together, with the same determination that had brought them this far. Because they had learned the most important lesson Mr. Montgomery wanted to teach. True value is never where everyone looks. It is where few dare to search. And when you have enough courage to search, to believe, to persist, the impossible becomes possible. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Sarah and Luke has touched your heart.